The battlefield was like a scene from hell. Smoke billowed from the horizon, broken only by flashes of plasma fire and the occasional explosion. The stench of scorched earth and ozone filled the air, mixing with the distant cries of the wounded. It was another planet, another war, one of many conflicts raging across the galaxy, fueled by territorial disputes, alien politics, and the insatiable demand for resources. To the Marines of the Zarephian coalition, this was just another mission, but to the human warrior among them, it was personal. Private James Brick Mason, a soldier from Earth, a Class 12 Deathworld, was unlike any other in the squad. At 6'4", with a muscular frame forged by Earth's brutal gravity and extreme conditions, Mason had earned his nickname Brick for both his solid build and unyielding nature. His human resilience was a point of curiosity for his alien comrades, though they had heard stories about humans, how their kind could survive on a deathworld where the wildlife, weather, and even the planet itself were constantly trying to kill them. The reality was still hard to grasp for these Marines, who hailed from peaceful, temperate planets. Mason had been stationed with the Zarephian Marine Corps for 6 months, fighting alongside them in a war against the Rynthak, a brutal insectoid race known for their hive mind strategies and relentless assault tactics. The Rynthak were an unstoppable force, their large, armored bodies and advanced weaponry proving deadly in open combat. The Zarephian Marines, a mix of several different species from across the galaxy, had been struggling against them for years, but Earth had recently joined the galactic community, and humans were just starting to prove their worth in this interstellar conflict. As the Marines prepared for their latest mission, an assault on a Rynthak outpost deep in enemy territory, there was a tangible tension in the air. This wasn't going to be an easy fight. The Rynthak held a strong defensive position, and their forces outnumbered the Marines 3-1. They had dug in, fortified, and were ready for the inevitable confrontation. In the dropship, the Zarephian Marines sat in grim silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Sergeant Rynthak, the squad leader, was a massive Zarephian with green, scaled skin and 4 thick arms. He glanced at Mason, who was methodically checking his weapons with a calm, focused expression. "You nervous, human?" Rynthak asked, his voice a deep rumble. Mason shook his head, not even looking up. "Not nervous, focused." Rynthak snorted, his reptilian features twisting into a half-smile. "You humans and your bravery. I've seen you in battle. You fight like you've got nothing to lose." Mason finished adjusting the plasma rifle, slinging it over his shoulder before finally meeting Rynthak's gaze. "Where I come from, you either fight, or you die. Simple as that." The other Marines exchanged glances. The stories of Earth were well known throughout the galaxy, but most of the Zarephians had never met a Deathworlder before Mason. They had heard rumors about how humans could endure extreme pain, push their bodies far beyond normal limits, and keep fighting even when all hope seemed lost. But hearing stories and witnessing it firsthand were two different things. The dropship jerked violently as it passed through the atmosphere, shaking the Marines in their seats. The tension in the cabin ratcheted up a notch as the unmistakable sounds of battle grew closer, the heavy thrum of Rynthak plasma cannons, the crackling of energy shields, and the distant roar of explosions. 2 minutes to drop zone, barked the ship's AI, its robotic voice filling the cabin. Rynthak nodded to his squad, his forearms moving in synchronized fashion as he grabbed his weapon. "All right, Marines, this is it. We get in, we take out the Rynthak command center, and we get out. Stay sharp, stay close, and don't do anything stupid. Understood?" A chorus of "Yes, sir," echoed through the cabin. Mason remained silent, his mind already in battle mode. His pulse quickened, but not out of fear. This was adrenaline, the calm before the storm feeling that always came just before the chaos of combat. The dropship shuddered as it landed with a jarring thud. The doors hissed open, revealing the war-torn landscape of the Rynthak outpost. Mason was the first out, hitting the ground running, his rifle at the ready. The other Marines followed close behind, fanning out into their assigned positions as they prepared for the assault. The Rynthak defenses were formidable. Their outpost was encircled by energy barriers, turret emplacements, and trenches filled with their armored soldiers. The moment the Marines hit the ground, the Rynthak opened fire, plasma bolts streaking through the air, illuminating the battlefield in a deadly light show. Mason moved with the precision of a seasoned soldier, ducking behind cover and returning fire with deadly accuracy. He could feel the heat of plasma bolts passing dangerously close to his head, but he didn't flinch. His mind was in the zone, calculating every move with ruthless efficiency. The rest of the Marines held their own, but the battle was fierce, and the Rynthak were relentless. As the Marines pressed forward, they encountered heavy resistance. A squad of Rynthak soldiers, their exoskeletons glistening in the harsh light, charged toward Mason's position. He dropped to one knee, squeezing the trigger of his plasma rifle and cutting them down with precise bursts, but more kept coming. Suddenly, Mason felt a sharp, burning pain in his left arm. He glanced down just in time to see a Rynthak plasma bolt tear through his forearm, severing it at the elbow. His rifle clattered to the ground, and blood sprayed from the wound. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down, the sound of battle fading into the background. One of the Zarephian Marines saw the injury and shouted in panic, "Mason, fall back, you're hit!" But Mason didn't move. His eyes locked on the advancing Rynthak, and instead of retreating, he bent down, picked up his fallen rifle with his remaining hand, and continued to fire. His face was a mask of grim determination, the pain of his lost limbs seemingly irrelevant. The Zarephian Marines watched in stunned disbelief as Mason, with one arm missing and blood pouring from his wound, pushed forward, cutting through the Rynthak with the precision of a killing machine. Rynthak, watching from a distance, couldn't believe what he was seeing. In all his years of combat, he had never witnessed such raw, unrelenting resilience. "Mason, pull back," Rynthak shouted through the comms, his voice tinged with urgency. "You're losing too much blood." But Mason ignored the command, his focus solely on the enemy in front of him. His breath came in ragged bursts, his vision narrowing as adrenaline surged through his veins. The pain was there, gnawing at the edges of his consciousness, but he shoved it aside, forcing his body to keep moving, keep fighting. With his left arm gone, he had to adjust his stance, gripping the rifle in his right hand and firing in short, controlled bursts. The recoil jarred his body, sending sharp waves of pain through his shoulder, but he didn't let up. The Rynthak, stunned by the humans' refusal to fall, began to hesitate, their advance faltering as they faced this unstoppable force. As Mason charged forward, he reached the trench where the Rynthak soldiers had been fortified. Without a second thought, he jumped down into the trench, landing on top of a Rynthak warrior. With a savage yell, he drove his boot into the creature's chest, shoving it to the ground before firing a plasma bolt into its head. The other Rynthak soldiers scrambled to respond, but Mason was already moving. He ducked under a swinging blade, spinning around and slamming the butt of his rifle into the face of another soldier. Blood sprayed as the Rynthak's exoskeleton cracked under the blow, and Mason finished it off with a point-blank shot to the chest. From the other side of the battlefield, the Zarephian Marines could only watch in awe as Mason tore through the Rynthak ranks like a force of nature. Rynthak, his usual calm demeanor shaken, barked orders to his squad. "Support Mason, get in there and back him up." The Marines snapped into action, rushing to Mason's position. As they closed the distance, they could see the toll the battle was taking on the human. His uniform was soaked with blood, his movements growing slower and more labored, but he kept fighting, his face twisted in a mixture of rage and grim determination. By the time the Marines reached him, Mason had cleared the trench of Rynthak soldiers. He stood in the middle of the carnage, his chest heaving with exertion, his severed arm dripping blood onto the dirt below. The adrenaline that had kept him going was starting to fade, and the pain, now overwhelming, threatened to pull him under. Rynthak was the first to reach him. The Zarephian sergeant grabbed Mason by the shoulder, pulling him back behind cover. "Damn it, Mason, you're going to bleed out if we don't get you patched up." Mason grunted, still gripping his rifle in his remaining hand. "We're not done yet." Rynthak shook his head, his reptilian eyes wide with disbelief. "You lost an arm, you should be dead, human." Mason gave a weak, humorless laugh. "You don't know humans, Sergeant." Before Rynthak could respond, another explosion rocked the battlefield. The Rynthak had regrouped, and more soldiers were closing in on their position. The Marines braced themselves for another assault, but Mason, despite his injuries, raised his rifle once more, ready to fight. "Brick, fall back," Rynthak ordered, his voice filled with concern. But Mason shook his head, his expression grim. "I told you, we're not done." With the Rynthak forces advancing, the Marines had no choice but to dig in and prepare for a brutal close-quarters fight. Plasma fire rained down on them from all sides, and the air was filled with the deafening roar of battle. Despite his grievous injury, Mason refused to retreat. He fought like a man possessed, his one good arm working the rifle with deadly precision. Rynthak, now fighting alongside Mason, couldn't help but marvel at the human's resilience. He had seen soldiers push through pain before, but this was something else entirely. Mason should have collapsed long ago from blood loss and shock, yet here he was, still fighting, still killing, refusing to go down. The battle raged for what felt like hours, the Marines holding their ground against the relentless Rynthak assault. But slowly, they began to turn the tide. One by one, the Rynthak soldiers fell, their ranks thinning as the Marines pressed forward with renewed determination. Mason's vision blurred as he fought, his body screaming in protest. The pain was unbearable now, his severed arm a constant reminder of the price he was paying, but he pushed through it, gritting his teeth and focusing on the fight. He knew that if they didn't win here, the Rynthak would overrun their position, and they would all be dead. With one final surge, the Marines broke through the Rynthak defenses. The alien soldiers, demoralized and outnumbered, began to retreat, their once coordinated assault crumbling in the face of the human-led onslaught. Rynthak's squad pursued them, driving the Rynthak forces back and securing the outpost. As the battle finally came to an end, the Marines regrouped, their bodies battered and bruised, but victorious. Mason, his face pale from blood loss, slumped against a wall, his breathing shallow. Rynthak rushed to his side, quickly applying a medkit to stop the bleeding from his severed arm. "You're insane, Mason," Rynthak muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "No one fights like that, not after losing a limb." Mason managed a weak smile, his eyes half closed. "Humans, we don't give up." Rynthak laughed, a deep, rumbling sound. "No, I guess you don't." Word of the battle spread quickly throughout the Zarephian coalition. Stories of the human who had kept fighting after losing a limb became legend, a symbol of the Deathworlder spirit and the indomitable will of humanity. Mason's fellow Marines, once unsure of their human comrade, now looked at him with a newfound respect and admiration. Mason, after receiving medical treatment, was fitted with a state-of-the-art prosthetic arm, one that made him an even more formidable warrior. He returned to the battlefield soon after, fighting alongside his alien comrades with the same unyielding determination that had earned him their trust. For the Zarephian Marines, Mason was more than just a soldier. He was a reminder that even in the darkest moments of war, when all hope seemed lost, the human spirit could endure. No matter the odds, no matter the pain, humanity would always fight on.